Well, I think the question, what's your question on that, Rob?
Yeah.
Well, I'm from the UK, as you all know, and people say there isn't a class system there anymore. That is categorically false. There absolutely is. It has been around for centuries and likely will be around for at least a century more. I feel like AI might actually make things worse, but I'm interested to get your take on this.
You
What's it like in
define a
the
class
US?
system?
So, sorry.
You define a class system?
Yeah, and this might be something that you need to define as well for the US. But to me, growing up in the UK, class system is very much based upon what you're born into. So you can become nouveau riche, you can grow up poor and become wildly rich, but that might not necessarily change how people perceive you. You know, the perception of where you're from, how you speak, what your accent is, that can peg you as a certain class. So essentially, there are three classes: the working, the middle, which a lot of people fall into, and then the upper class, which is not quite the one percenters, but I would say probably pretty close. And perhaps the apex of that would be the royal family, which a lot of people saw as this idealist. I don't want to say movement, but this idealist thing that people would aspire to but never get to. And the upper class would be just below that. So kind of landed gentry. They have a lot of familial wealth that they've grown into through generations, and then they just built on that. They go to the best schools, they get the best jobs, they have the best connections, and the middle class is kind of where middle class and working class is kind of where most people would fall into, depending on which part of the country you live in. So there's a lot to unpack there, but my question here was, and my thinking is that I think that AI will potentially make the class system worse. It'll push people further apart. So the rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer, and the middle will get probably flatter, I imagine.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the British system because that one's interesting. Like, I don't know if they still have like lords and barons and all that kind of stuff, if that's even a thing anymore. My mother-in-law is British, so I think she moved to the US when she was 18, and they watch everything the royal family does, her and her four daughters. And um, I gotta say, I don't really understand it. I think for them, it's like entertainment. It's like watching reality television.
It's car
Um,
crash TV, not reality.
it's yeah, but it is important to them. Like it is part of, even though all of her daughters were born in America or an American, like it's just part of their heritage and it's a big deal. So I don't know if that's good or bad, honestly. Like you growing up in Britain might have a very different feel for that. My American reaction to it is, you know, death to the monarchs. Like, what the heck? I thought we did cover this a long time ago. Like, that's my just natural, uh, when the world's going on here. Why do we have dictators and royals and whatever? But I'll admit that might be an ignorant position. That's just very American to the idea of monarchy. So a class system is an interesting terminology because we also work with a lot of people from India and they would call it a caste system, I believe.
Mhm.
And other places in Southeast Asia, absolutely. I mean, all the way down to slaves, in certain countries that still exist, and you have those. And so, what is that? I couldn't reasonably speak to those systems because I don't know enough about them. Is it going to make India worse, or is it going to make those other countries that have, actual slavery and the caste system all the way up? I have no idea. The US, I think a little bit of history is worth pointing out, right? So if you go back like 300 years, there was no such thing as a middle class anywhere in the world. Like that didn't exist. It was the royals, the barons, the lords, and the serfs. And there's different versions of that depending on where you're at, if you're in Roman society or if you're whatever. And you could argue that if you went back as far as the Greeks and Romans, there was some level of a middle class, but depending on whose history you read, because I have read different conflicting stories, the majority of people living in Rome during the height of the Roman Empire, so 2000 years ago, were slaves. So you were a slave or you owned slaves was kind of the majority, right? So this whole concept of middle class is a relatively new in the history of humanity. And what brought about the middle class? I think the American experiment was certainly a huge portion of that, right? And the property rights, life, liberty, property, the pursuit of happiness was the original. Well, happiness was added later by Jefferson, but the first three were life, liberty, and property. Because if I can own my own property, you get rid of serfdom and these types of things that I can control my land. This is, of course, during agrarian societies. I can, grow my own food. I can hunt. I can survive. I don't need anybody else. I can become self-sufficient. I'm not beholden to other people. And so that concept eventually led to, the ability to create wealth, and then you have industrial societies, and so I can control the means to production and so on. And certainly there were good things and there were bad things that came out of those. Okay, so what does that bring us to today? I think the US and basically the Western world still has large middle class societies, certainly from a historical context. Are those shrinking? I don't know the statistics on that. Do we have fewer middle class people in 2024 than we did in 2014 or 2004? I don't really know. It's hard to tell with the inflation if that's changed. From what I understand, America has more millionaires than anywhere else in the world. And other than like some tiny country in Europe, I think more millionaires per capita. So the ability to move up, there's been research done that looks at the different quartiles. So you got the lowest 25%, then the second, third, and then the highest. And there is definitely still mobility in America between them, that you can be born into the lowest 25%. I mean, I'm listening to a book by Tim Ferriss called Tools of Titans right now. And most of the people he interviews did not grow up wealthy that have become massively wealthy. Your Tony Robbins, your Shaun Whites, or, so some are athletes, some are Seth Ramit, I think I'm saying his name right. Seth Godin. I mean, none of these people were coming for money, and they all have made it. And most of the people that I know that are successful entrepreneurs are generally first or second generation. Quite a lot of them, their fathers started businesses, their parents did, and they came into that, and have continued to make them successful. Interesting there is statistically, when kids take over, businesses are more likely to fail. So even though there is this idea that, oh yeah, well, you were born into money, it's like, yeah, but the reality is most of the time those businesses don't succeed. So even though I know a bunch of people that are second generation or even third generation, that's not across the board, statistically common. All right, so we got this history. Where does it put us now with AI? I think when you see the people that have become billionaires, let's just say the really high ones up, the Elon Musks, the Jeff Bezos, and so on, they use one method of printing money, which is they create a company and then they literally print shares. It's called an IPO, and they can make as many as they want, and it's a form of currency. And then if people want it, whether it's a good business or bad business, is almost secondary to the fact that it's a sexy business, it's a interesting business, it's a well-marketed business, and that creates wealth. Technically, anybody can still do that. Now, 9 out of 10 VC backed, so venture capital backed businesses fail. I do think there's a chance that there's going to be some consolidation here. What does that mean? Well, most of the growth that you see from Google, from Amazon, from basically the FANG stocks, is still coming from acquisitions. Anybody that has AI, computer vision, or whatever in their name, they're just buying those companies up because they can't take the risk of losing them. It's like when Facebook bought WhatsApp. Why the heck would they buy WhatsApp? It wasn't monetized and whatever. It's because they needed to make sure that they had a user base that wasn't going to depart from the Facebook ecosystem and go somewhere else, right? What about when they bought Instagram? Same idea. And what about when Google bought YouTube? Well, they now have the number one and number two search engines in the world. So all of those strategic billion-dollar acquisitions, you're seeing a lot of that with AI right now, and most of them will fail. They'll buy something, they'll just shut it down, or they'll take the tech and they'll roll it up or whatever. I think there's a possibility for that. The other side of it is, though, let's just say you believe that's the case. Let's say you believe AI is going to dominate in every industry. I bought Nvidia stock 15 years ago. It's up like 20,000% or something. that I know. I don't even know that I knew what NVIDIA was when I bought it. Like, I don't remember. Um, it was such a long time ago. So had I been smart, I would have put a whole lot more money in it. I didn't put that much in. It was like one of 10 or 15 stocks or something like that I bought at the time. Um, and so it hasn't made me independently wealthy. It could have. Uh, but like that's a way that you could actively participate in the AI growth. If you believe there's a play, whether it's NVIDIA or Google or Microsoft or whatever, we do have a market where you can take money and invest in that instead of going to Starbucks every day or instead of, whatever your vice is. Um, and everybody has access to that. I think there are some challenges. I'm not sure what you're sharing there, Chuck, with,
Look at later, man.
all right. And this is something I'm trying to understand better, the early stage stuff. So this is VC level, like I wouldn't necessarily even say angel, but private equity group. That's harder to get access to. A lot of those things are what's called private investors, and that's been around for decades. And it's essentially what the SEC considers to be high risk investments. And to take on these high risk investments, you have to have a certain net worth and certain income. I think it's $250,000 a year in income and $1 million net worth, something like that. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it's in that range. And so those the average person doesn't have access to. But I think Robinhood made it very obvious that anybody with a few bucks could participate and invest in these things. Um, if you believe that's the case. So that's does that make the class system better or worse? It would depend on if you participate or not.
Yeah.
Right. So if you do take a few bucks and invest in the companies that are likely to grow and do well, or heck, you just put in the S&P 500 because all the growth from those has come from the FANG stocks in the last 15 years.
In America is different than Europe. Rob, you said something earlier that caught my attention. That's when you mentioned landed gentry. I mean, you have that whole nobility thing that has come up all through Europe. We don't have that here in the States. There is nothing that says I can't become this or I can't become that. There are no laws that say I can't be governor or I can't be president unless I meet the age and etc. So whereas in Europe, if I wanted to be part of the nobility, if I wanted to be a marquis or something, that's a title that would have to be given to me and or inherited. So that's we don't really have that over here. So it's a very different kind of class system. It's all about the money, honey. That's what we care about here in the States. If look at like Stanford and these Ivy League schools. We definitely have a class system. I mean, you don't have tons of poor people going to Harvard or going to Stanford. So you definitely have to be part of that upper class, or you have to be exceptionally brilliant to the point where you get their attention, which is also a form of currency. Our minds and our ability, that's how we pay for our way through the world. Our hands, the work we do, that is our currency. It's what we are worth.
So
I'd
how's
say it's
AI going to
slightly
change
different
that?
on that, Chuck. Sorry, go ahead, Ron.
No, I was going to say, so how's AI going to change that? Because regardless of whether you're in India, the UK, Germany, the US, AI is going to have an impact, right? And you don't just need to be an investor, which is, I guess, what you were mentioning, Brian. Like you can just buy into the game and sit back. But alongside that, on a daily basis, in almost every knowledge work field, AI is going to have an impact. So that's where I see things widening, like curves flattening and some getting tighter. Like how do you see that in the US or in general?
That's why you invest your currency, your mind, your hands, your abilities, and your skills in AI. You learn about it. If you're a knowledge worker, if you're a doctor or you're a lawyer, you need to be looking at the tech. You need to be helping work out the bugs in the tech because, like it or not, this train is going forward and nobody is stopping it. So you can either get on the train or you can get off the track because the technology will proceed. Okay. It will either help you as a doctor or it will push you out of the industry because you ignored it. So it's what I'm saying. Your personal currency is your mind, it's your hands, it's the work you do. Invest that into AI. Learn how it's going to help you in your job, and you won't lose your job. You won't be replaced by it. You might actually find yourself in charge of things.
I guess the question I'm asking is, what does society look like in
Can I
10, 50, 100 years?
can I take a different angle?
Yeah.
Which is the AI is going to produce opportunities for things that we've never thought of, right? So, um, just look at the internet and all the things influencers, right? No one ever thought of you would get paid by going around the world taking pictures of yourself in these places, and now you're a millionaire, right? So if we just take a scratch of AI, like what can AI do? It does so many things. It can help you produce videos, content, written, audio, video, you name it. There's so much there that they might not be the ones who develop the software, but they're the ones who are going to use the software, like Chuck said, to do something that's never been done before, that entertains people, that helps people grow some way, that does something that puts more out there. So there's that barrier that is removed, that it's accessible to a lot of people. There's systems out there. It's just them connecting the dots saying, hey, I can get in front of an audience that is going to be interested in this, is going to pay me just to produce this stuff, just to use this stuff, just to show them how to use this stuff, just to, you name it. So that's going to open up a lot of doors for people, but it still comes down to the person. If you're not willing to invest your time and effort, whether that means to build the stuff, to use the stuff, to advertise the stuff, you're not going to get out of your class. You're not going to move up at all. But the nice thing is that in America, it is literally just, hey, if you put your time and effort in and you do the work and you find out what people are willing to pay for and how they're going to pay and so on, you can move ahead. Unlike some other countries, like you said, in Europe, that's basically if you have the wrong accent or if you're born in the wrong area, you're pegged as blank. So I think that allows us, AI is going to allow the ability to get out of a class. That doesn't mean it's going to necessarily force the classes to be readjusted.
I think there's a chance that it's going to actually hurt some of the upper class too. So a few things. Class is a weird way of saying it, but it would be totally dishonest to say it doesn't matter who you know, right? Like there's a saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. That does matter. So if you want to get into Stanford and Harvard and you got these skills or whatever, or you know an alumni that donates $100 million a year, guess which one has a better chance of getting in, right? It's the one that has the connection to the person you know. And so I think it's part of reality and part of dealing with life is recognizing these things and using them to your advantage. So whether you call that a class system or just you have to really be good at networking. We wrote a book. What's the book doing? It just got us to interview on a television show that's been around for 19 years. Why? Because we wrote a book. Like it's an interesting book, it's on a relevant topic, but we could be having these conversations and be an interesting topic and relevant. But the fact that a book got us connections that now can get us to other places, is a strategy you use to build that credibility so you can get to the people you want. And guess who's allowed to write a book? Everybody. All right. Well, how do you get good enough to write a book? Well, you read a lot of books. Well, who has access to books? Well, everybody. So there is this ability to say, okay, what's the process look like here in creating a person who you want to be? Why do I think it can hurt people at the upper levels? Well, medical, I think, is a great example of this.
Okay.
The research has shown the longer doctors are out of medical school, the worse they get. The only exception is surgeons. Why is that? They don't stay up to date with the research and they don't get immediate feedback. And I can give you a personal example right now. I had a partial thyroidectomy, so I'm meeting with an endocrinologist. The endocrinologist says, hey, your levels look off. I'm like, okay, well, do supplements affect this? Does diet affect this? Does anything affect this? Oh, I don't think that's, any of that's relevant. A 2-minute search on the Consensus app in ChatGPT produced relevant research. These are actual published studies that showed supplements like D, A, selenium, zinc, iodide, all affect your thyroid function. Now, 3 of those I take regularly. And she knew that because they ask me that when I go in for my doctor's appointment. Now, AI that was doing its job, and this is something that we want to help build, is it should have connected immediately. The blood work that showed thyroid, not where in the range that it should be, with the potential for these supplements. And the interesting part is the supplements might not have been that I was taking them. It might have been that I wasn't taking enough of them.
Oh.
Right? Like the fact that they are related doesn't tell me in which direction or that the quantity is sufficient. It just says, hey, there's a potential connection here. Could we treat this with the natural solution, diet, supplementation, and so on, versus going on hormones for the rest of your life. But that's not even a question. And so that doctor that doesn't even consider the 2 minutes of effort that I put in to go look up a consensus app GPT, and look this stuff up and get the studies, uh, is going to become irrelevant. Like, and this is the second endocrinologist I went through because the first one gave me the wrong blood work. Like that didn't have nothing to do with it. I don't know why they gave me the wrong blood work. Like it just was irrelevant. And so I don't know if I don't know why this is. Is it a lack of interest by the doctors? Are they just too overworked, too busy, see too many patients? It's a system where they got to churn them in and out. I don't know the answer or the cause of it, but doctors who are relevant and want to look at the latest research. I'm going to give you another example. So I had cancer when I was 19 years old. I asked the doctor, we went through chemo and radiation treatments. Hey, are there any long-term effects? Nope, no long-term effects. Like this is the best solution. And I was cured, been in remission. I've had 2 secondary cancers since then in the last 20 years. Oh, interesting. I wonder if anybody knew this. I looked up the research. I found the study. It was published in 1999. I started my chemo treatments in 2000. The research was there. He should have known that there were long-term effects. And I don't know that I changed my protocol, but for to say, hey, there's no research that shows radiation has long-term effects was inaccurate. That study actually had run over 30 years. They had checked for 3 decades secondary cancers after radiation treatment. And it was published at least a year before I started my treatments. And so you look at this and say, why, why aren't doctors staying up to date? Well, it's an effort to some degree, but using AI, you can connect all these dots. And the number of doctors that I've talked to that understand biometrics, that understand how to use AI, the one that's going to interview me in his television show is the first one that I'm aware of that even knows Norway exists. He has one. And he said to me, and this was just sort of as we're starting our conversation, kind of leading into, we just had a quick phone chat. He said, I don't know, it's possible that we're not going to need general practitioners in the future. And I don't know that I agree with him on that. I'm definitely thinking on that because I'm going to look forward to that conversation with him. But that's essentially what I'm saying, right? Like if the endocrinologist and my GP can't make these connections between diet, exercise, all of my medical history, my blood work, and so on, and say, hey, here's how we solve this problem together, they are irrelevant. Why do I need them? I mean, what are they? The only thing they can do is work with the insurance companies to order the blood work. Well, guess what?
Well,
You're not getting. I
they're
just
not
got
irrelevant, Brian.
What's that?
They're not irrelevant. They're dangerous at that point.
Dangerous.
Sure. I mean, that's fair to say. I mean, even the most recent prescription, everything that I started was a couple of weeks ago, and it's like, hey, we'll check in 6 weeks. Like, really? That's it. So I got to take all this like a daily medication for 6 weeks before you're going to check in on me, and like, it's. I have biometrics that can tell you right now that there's a side effects to this, right? And so this information we have, and they don't even know it exists. They don't even know that this is an option. So those doctors are almost certainly going to retire or just like not be interested. I don't know what's going to happen to them, but they're going to not survive this shift in the next 5 years. And so I think there's a play to that in every single profession. In the research Ethan Mollick recently published, I think he's at Stanford, he wrote the book Co-Intelligence. I probably said the wrong school, whichever school he's at, maybe Chuck, he showed that people at the lower end of the spectrum at a very, very good consulting company, BCG, Boston Consulting Group. So these are already the top 1% of skilled labored people, technical people in the world. You don't get in a Boston Consulting Group, unless maybe your uncle works there or something. I don't know. But as a general rule, you're coming only from Ivy League. You have a pretty good education at the very least. And theoretically, they put you through some serious interviews to make sure you're good quality. So his research was the lower of Boston Consultant Group in certain skill sets and the higher, right? And so this is like, hey, we're going to look at NBA players and compare the lower ones to the higher ones. Like it's an odd study, I think. But his research did show that the ones at the lower end that needed help, AI brought their skill levels up in certain tasks more than it helped the people at the top end. Essentially, it closed the gap between the lower end and the higher end, so it made it closer. Can you extrapolate that out to the general public? I think that's going to be extremely, extremely challenging. If you have very poor writing skills, probably AI is going to help you just because any writing skills are better than your poor writing skills, right? Like, so if you're starting at a very low level and you have AI help you write an email or write any, a blog or an article or whatever about a topic, a book report at school, like, sure, if your skills are that low, it's going to bump you up immediately. But once you get to the, hey, am I a good copywriter or a poor copywriter? Is this copy going to sell or is it not? Is this marketing ad relevant and so on? I think you're at a different level. And now it's only as good as you are, because you have to, if you're a great creative person, it'll give you more ideas and more creative and more tools,
Okay.
right? And that's just going to make you even better at your job. And if you're an average creative person, it's still going to give you more creative. It's just going to be harder for you to identify what's good. So I do think everybody will kind of move up closer. I would say that the difference between the best and the lowest will get closer. But my challenge would be, and this is something that I think is really important for people to consider, and this is really in line with what Chuck and Greg was saying. If I'm in the top 2% of people or the top 10% of people, with AI, I can now get 10 times as much work done, right? So the question is, in my industry, do people need 10 times as much work, right? Do we need 10 times as many lawyers? Do we need 10 times as many lawsuits? Do we need 10 times as many, fill in the blank here, marketers, accountants, etc.? If that answer is no, and I'm not in the top 10%, I need to get my skills there, because then my skills plus the AI to leverage it is going to do really well. But if I'm in the bottom 20% and AI brings me up to the bottom 50%, I think I'm still irrelevant. I got better, the skill gap dropped, I'm still going to get it replaced. Does that make sense?
Does to me. Chuck, Greg, you got anything you want to sum this up with? Because I think we're just about out of time.
I think Brian touched on everything perfectly, man. I really can't add to that. Greg, you
Greg?
got it?
Nothing new. It
Yeah.
covers pretty much.
Nailed it.
it.